The clink of enamel mugs, the slow gurgle of the percolator, the buttery scent of toast warming on a chrome rack. Step back to the mornings of the 1960s, when breakfast was more than a meal, it was a ritual. In an age before microwaves and instant coffee machines, mornings unfolded in a warm haze of sizzling skillets, newspaper rustles, and gentle chatter across the table. This was the era when food was homemade or bought fresh from the corner shop, when brand jingles played on the radio, and kids dashed out the door with crumbs still on their cheeks. In this journey, we'll revisit 25 breakfasts your grandparents may have savored, some hearty, some humble, all memorable. You'll taste the flaky pastries, smell the wood-smoked bacon, and remember the little details, the chipped plates, the milk bottle on the doorstep that made breakfast in the 60s special. Steel-cut oatmeal with brown sugar. Picture it, the soft hiss of steam escaping from a heavy-lidded pot, the slow, steady bubble of oats thickening on the stove. Steel-cut oatmeal wasn't instant, oh no, it took its time. The aroma was nutty and earthy, filling the kitchen while frost still clung to the windows. You'd ladle it into deep bowls, the steam curling up to warm your cheeks, then sprinkle a generous spoonful of dark brown sugar over the top. Instantly, it melted into glossy rivulets, pooling into the oat crevices like tiny rivers of gold. Some folks swirled in a splash of thick cream delivered fresh by the milkman that morning, turning it into something rich and velvety. It wasn't fancy, but it was hearty. It stuck with you through a long school day or a morning out on the farm. And there was comfort in the ritual, the slow stirring, the clink of spoons against the sides of bowls, the way the last bites seemed even sweeter as they cooled. In an age before sugar-filled cereal boxes dominated the breakfast table, this was a warm, humble start to the day. A meal you didn't just eat, but experienced from the first waft of steam to the last satisfying spoonful.
Fried bread with drippings. If you grew up in a house where nothing went to waste, you probably know exactly what this was. The pan from breakfast bacon or last night's roast would still have a shimmering layer of drippings, liquid gold to a thrifty cook. Thick slices of yesterday's bread went straight in, sizzling the second they hit the hot fat. The smell was irresistible, meaty, rich, and just a little smoky. Each slice would turn a perfect golden brown, edges crisped to a satisfying crunch, the center chewy and warm. You didn't need butter. This bread was already infused with flavor. It was eaten hot, sometimes with a fried egg balanced on top, sometimes just as it was, served alongside a strong cup of tea. Sure, it left your fingers a little greasy, but in a way, that was part of the charm. Back then, this was more than just breakfast. It was a testament to making the most of what you had, transforming scraps into something mouthwatering. You didn't count calories, you counted how fast the slices disappeared from the plate. And disappear they did, usually before the pan had even cooled. Corned beef hash. Few breakfasts could summon the family to the table faster than the smell of corned beef hash hitting a hot skillet. It began with leftovers, cold corned beef from the night before, chopped into small cubes. Add diced potatoes, onions, maybe even a few carrots, and toss them all into a frying pan with a knob of butter or a splash of oil. The sizzle was instant, the aroma savory and inviting. You'd stir and press it down, letting the edges crisp and caramelize until there were golden brown bits in every bite. Some families topped it with a fried egg, the runny yolk mingling with the salty meat and tender potatoes. It was a working man's breakfast, substantial, stick to your ribs, the kind of meal that could power you through hours of hard labor or a full day at school without a single stomach growl. In the 1960s, corned beef, whether from the butcher or straight out of a Libby's tin, was a kitchen staple, always ready for a quick, satisfying meal. And while modern breakfasts might be quicker, they'll never quite match the cozy, communal feeling of everyone digging into a shared pan of hash, eating it straight from the skillet while the morning sun streamed through the curtains. Sausage patties and fried apples. There's a magic that happens when savory and sweet share the same pan. Freshly ground pork sausage, seasoned with salt, pepper, and maybe a hint of sage, would hit the skillet first, sizzling loudly as it browned. The smell alone could wake the whole house. Once the patties were cooked, they'd be set aside, and into that same pan went slices of tart apples, Granny Smith or Macintosh, along with a pat of butter and a sprinkle of sugar. The apples softened, edges caramelizing, the sweetness mingling with the savory drippings left behind by the sausage. When served together, each bite was a perfect balance. Juicy, spiced pork paired with tender, buttery fruit. In rural kitchens, this was often a harvest season favorite, when apples were abundant and mornings were crisp. It was the kind of breakfast you lingered over, taking a second or third helping without thinking twice. There was something deeply comforting about it, a reminder that simple ingredients, cooked with care, could create something extraordinary. And as you mopped up the last of the syrupy juices with a piece of toast, you knew you'd remember that taste for the rest of your life. Hot buttered crumpets. Few things could brighten a chilly morning like a plate of hot crumpets fresh from the griddle. Their pale golden tops, dotted with hundreds of little holes, were practically designed to drink up whatever you put on them. You'd take one in hand, still warm and spongy, and spread a generous pat of butter across the surface. The butter didn't just sit there, it melted instantly, vanishing into the holes until every bite promised that rich, salty flavor. Some folks preferred theirs topped with golden honey, letting it drip down the sides, while others swore by a smear of strawberry jam, the red against the golden crumpet making it look as good as it tasted. Crumpets were a treat that straddled the line between breakfast and snack, equally at home with the morning paper as they were in the late afternoon with a cup of tea. In the 1960s, you might have bought them for just a few pennies at the corner shop, wrapped in thin paper. There was no rushing a crumpet. They encouraged you to slow down, to savor each chewy, buttery bite while the steam still rose from your plate. And long after you'd eaten the last one, the comforting smell of toasted dough seemed to linger in the kitchen, like a quiet reminder that sometimes the simplest pleasures are the most satisfying. Sticky Chelsea buns. You could smell Chelsea buns before you ever saw them. Warm cinnamon, sweet dough, and that telltale caramelized sugar scent drifting from the bakery doorway. These spirals of soft bread, rolled with currants and brushed with a sticky glaze, were a weekend indulgence for many families in the 1960s. You'd step into the shop and see them lined up on big metal trays, their glossy tops catching the morning light. At home, you'd tear one apart, the inside still slightly warm, fingers instantly coated in syrup. The currants added bursts of chewy sweetness, while the cinnamon and sugar swirls made each bite taste like the very definition of comfort. Sometimes they were eaten with a cup of tea, other times just grabbed straight from the paper bag on the walk home, sticky hands and all. Back then, a Chelsea bun might have cost less than 10 cents, but the joy it brought was worth far more. There was something communal about them, too. They were made to be shared, pulled apart at the table while everyone reached for just one more piece. And no matter how much sugar you brushed off your fingers afterward, you knew you'd be licking them again the next Saturday morning. Date and walnut loaf. One slice of date and walnut loaf could fill both your stomach and your heart. Dense, moist, and dark with chopped dates, it carried a natural sweetness that paired perfectly with the earthy crunch of walnuts. Fresh from the oven, the smell was rich and inviting, a mix of toasted nuts and caramelized fruit. But the magic really happened once it was cooled and sliced thick. A good layer of salted butter would melt slowly into the surface, pooling in the tiny craters where a piece of walnut had been. In the 1960s, this was a homemade favorite, often baked on a Friday evening so it could be enjoyed over the weekend with tea. Dates were inexpensive and kept well, and walnuts could be bought in big paper bags from the grocer, making this a practical yet comforting choice for many families. Eating it was almost a quiet affair. There was a certain respect for the way the flavors balanced, the chew of the dates against the soft crunch of nuts. And long after the loaf was gone, the sweet, nutty aroma would still cling to the kitchen air, like a little promise that there would be another one soon. Jam tarts with morning tea. The best part about jam tarts was that they often started life as leftovers. A bit of pastry dough from last night's pie, rolled out and pressed into little tart tins, then filled with spoonfuls of whatever jam was in the pantry. Raspberry, plum, gooseberry if you were lucky. They'd bake quickly, the jam bubbling and darkening just enough to develop a richer flavor. When they came out of the oven, you had to wait, at least a little, because that molten jam could scald your tongue. But once cooled, they were the perfect partner to a strong morning tea. The pastry was light and flaky, the jam sweet and tangy, and together they made every bite feel just indulgent enough to brighten the day. In the 1960s, jam tarts were a frugal delight, using up odds and ends without anyone feeling deprived. They were small, but they carried the weight of tradition, something your grandmother might make on a rainy day, something you'd sneak from the cooling rack when no one was looking. And as the steam from your tea curled up into the morning light, a single jam tart on your saucer made the whole day seem just a bit sweeter.
Weetabix with warm milk. On a frosty morning, nothing quite said comfort like a steaming bowl of Weetabix. You'd open the box and pull out those neatly packed golden brown bricks, each one smelling faintly of toasted wheat. Dropped into a deep bowl, they sat sturdy until you poured over the warm milk, releasing a gentle, nutty aroma. Some people liked to eat them quickly, catching that perfect moment when they were softened just enough but still had a little bite. Others let them soak, stirring slowly until they turned into a smooth, hearty mush. And then came the best part, a drizzle of golden syrup or a sprinkle of sugar, creating little rivers of sweetness through the grains. In the 1960s, Weetabix was marketed as a wholesome, modern choice, but it had the same honest simplicity that your grandparents valued. It was cheap, filling, and reliable, exactly what you needed before heading out into the chilly morning air. There was something deeply satisfying about scraping the last bit from the bottom of the bowl, knowing you'd be warm for hours. And while kids today might be surrounded by colorful cereal boxes with cartoon mascots, there was a quiet charm in the plain, honest Weetabix box. No gimmicks, just a promise of a good start to the day. Kellogg's Cornflakes with banana slices. The sound was unmistakable, the rustle of a Kellogg's Cornflakes box being opened, followed by the delicate patter of golden flakes hitting the bowl. Light, crisp, and gleaming in the morning sun, they seemed almost too fragile to carry you through the day. That's where the banana came in. Slicing it into neat coins, you'd let them tumble across the flakes, their bright yellow adding a cheerful pop of color. Then came the milk, cold and fresh, sending up that gentle cereal scent as it met the flakes.
The first bite was pure crunch, followed by the mellow sweetness of banana, a perfect marriage of textures and flavors. In the 60s, cornflakes were considered a modern convenience, a quick breakfast that still felt wholesome. The box often sat proudly in the middle of the table, its red rooster mascot giving you a cheery good morning. And yes, there was a small race to finish before the milk turned the flakes too soft, though some people swore they liked them best when they were just on the edge of soggy. Either way, cornflakes with banana was more than just breakfast. It was sunshine in a bowl, a simple little luxury that always started the day on a bright note. Shredded wheat with sugar dusting. Shredded wheat was a breakfast you could recognize by sight alone. Those large, rectangular biscuits, tightly woven from strands of toasted wheat. They looked a bit plain in the box, but the magic happened when you poured warm milk over them. The biscuits softened from the outside in, the layers slowly loosening until you could press them apart with a spoon. A sprinkle of sugar on top would glisten like frost on a winter morning, melting just enough to seep into the nooks of the wheat. First produced in the early 20th century, shredded wheat had become a steady kitchen staple by the 1960s, advertised as nothing added, nothing taken away. It was hearty without being heavy, simple without being dull. For kids, the sugar was the treat, but for adults, it was the texture and honest flavor that kept them coming back. Eating it was an unhurried process. You couldn't really rush through a shredded wheat biscuit, and maybe that was the point. It was a breakfast that made you slow down, take your time, and enjoy the quiet moments before the day truly began. Porridge with golden syrup. The scent of porridge simmering on the stove was a morning comfort that seemed to seep into the walls of the kitchen. Rolled oats, boiled slowly in milk or water, turned creamy and thick, sending up soft clouds of steam. The bowl, once filled, was a blank canvas for something wonderful, Lyle's golden syrup. That familiar green and gold tin with its lion emblem would be brought to the table, the lid sticky from countless breakfasts before. You'd pour a slow, steady stream over the porridge, watching as it formed a glossy amber spiral, catching the light like liquid sunshine. The first spoonful was pure comfort, the oats warm and velvety, the syrup adding just the right touch of sweetness. In the 1960s, porridge wasn't just a breakfast, it was an act of care, something your parents or grandparents made to keep you full through long spool mornings or hard winter work. It was inexpensive, nourishing, and endlessly adaptable. And while some kids might have grumbled at a plain bowl of oats, that swirl of golden syrup could change everything. Even now, just the smell of porridge can take you back to those early mornings, sitting at a table warmed by the stove, spoon in hand, ready to face the day. Thick-cut French toast. The scent alone could make you linger in the kitchen. Thick slices of bread soaking up a golden mixture of beaten eggs, milk, and just a hint of vanilla. They'd be lowered into a sizzling skillet, the gentle hiss promising a crisp, caramelized edge. As the bread turned a deep golden brown, you'd already be reaching for the sugar bowl. A quick dusting would catch the light, sparkling against the warm surface, ready to melt into the crust. Some families kept it simple with just the sugar. Others added a squeeze of lemon for that sharp, sweet bite. And for those with an extra sweet tooth, a dollop of jam, strawberry, plum, or whatever was in the pantry, would be spread across the top. In the 1960s, French toast was often made from bread that was a day or two old, a thrifty way to give it new life. It was the kind of breakfast you didn't rush, sitting down at the table with a hot mug of tea or coffee, savoring each tender bite. And if you were lucky enough to have the last piece from the pan, it felt like winning a small but delicious prize before the day had even begun. Marmalade on toast. You'd hear the snap of the toaster, Smell the faint smokiness of bread just reaching that perfect golden brown, and know that marmalade was coming. Thick slices of bread, hot enough to make the butter melt on contact, became the stage for this bittersweet star. The jar, often labeled Seville orange marmalade in simple block letters, would be opened to reveal a glistening amber spread flecked with bits of orange peel. You'd spoon it on generously, letting it melt slightly into the butter beneath, creating a glossy, sticky layer. The first bite was always a burst of flavor. The tang of citrus, the gentle bitterness of the peel, balanced by the mellow richness of the toast. In the 60s, marmalade had a kind of grown-up sophistication. It wasn't just sweet, it was bold, and perhaps that's why kids either loved it or left it to the adults. A jar might last weeks, pulled out for slow Sunday breakfasts or quick weekday mornings. It wasn't just food, it was a small ritual. The comfort of that familiar taste, the warmth of the toast in your hands, the way it paired perfectly with a strong cup of tea. These were the little things that could anchor a morning before the world outside demanded your attention. Rice pudding leftovers. There was something quietly indulgent about opening the fridge in the morning and finding last night's rice pudding waiting for you. The top might have developed that faint skin, the kind you could lift with a spoon to reveal the creamy, sweet custard beneath. Cold and thick, the grains of rice had softened even more overnight, turning the pudding into something rich and almost velvety. Some people liked it just as it was, straight from the bowl. Others added a drizzle of cream for extra luxury, or a spoonful of jam for a bright, fruity contrast. Rice pudding had been a staple dessert for decades, but in the 1960s, leftovers often doubled as breakfast. It was practical and too good to waste. The flavor was simple, a gentle sweetness with a whisper of nutmeg or cinnamon if it had been baked that way. It was the sort of breakfast that felt like a secret treat, especially if you didn't tell the others there was still some left. And as you ate it, cold spoonful after cold spoonful, you might remember the warm, steamy kitchen from the night before, when the pudding had been fresh from the oven and everyone had gone back for seconds. The moment you lifted the lid off the steamer, the air filled with the deep caramel scent of treacle. A leftover from the night before, the sponge was still tender, its rich, dark syrup clinging to the sides. Steam rose as you sliced into it, the sponge yielding easily to the knife, revealing that soft, almost pudding-like crumb. Served in a warm bowl, it was often paired with a splash of hot custard or a spoonful of cream, turning it into a breakfast far more indulgent than the weekday norm. Treacle sponge had a way of making the morning feel special, even if it was just an ordinary Tuesday. In the 1960s, this wasn't considered strange. Leftover desserts were fair game for breakfast, especially in households where nothing went to waste. There was joy in reheating something so decadent, watching the syrup melt and glisten again, as if it had just been made. Each bite was dense, sweet, and comforting, the kind of flavor that stayed with you all day. And as you scraped the last of the syrup from the bowl, you might find yourself secretly hoping there would be more leftovers tomorrow. There was a quiet sort of ceremony to a soft-boiled egg breakfast. The egg, still nestled in its shell, would be placed upright in a little egg cup, sometimes plain, sometimes shaped like a favorite animal. The top was tapped gently with a spoon until it cracked, then peeled away to reveal the trembling, golden treasure inside. Steam would escape, carrying that unmistakable warm, eggy aroma. Beside it sat the soldiers, strips of toast, buttered from crust to crust, cut just the right width for dipping. One by one, they'd be plunged into the molten yolk, each bite carrying that rich, creamy flavor. In the 1960s, this wasn't just breakfast. It was an event, especially for children. The combination of fun and food was unbeatable. Sometimes there'd be a little sprinkle of salt on the yolk, the way your grandmother always did it, or maybe a dash of pepper if you were feeling grown up. And even after the yolk was gone, there was still the egg white to scoop out with a spoon, making sure not to waste a bit. It was simple, it was satisfying, and it always left you with warm hands, a full belly, and the feeling that the day was already off to a gentle, happy start.
Poached eggs on toast were a breakfast for those who appreciated a little elegance on a weekday morning. The water would simmer quietly on the stove, a splash of vinegar helping the egg whites curl neatly around the yolk. When done right, the egg emerged delicate and wobbly, like a soft cloud cradling sunshine in its center. It would be lifted carefully from the water and placed onto a waiting slice of hot buttered toast. The butter would melt instantly, seeping into the bread's crumb, ready to mingle with the yolk. A sprinkle of black pepper and maybe a pinch of salt was all it needed. The first cut of the knife released a slow golden stream that soaked into the toast below, creating a forkful that was pure perfection. In the 1960s, poached eggs had a certain hotel breakfast quality at home, simple yet refined. It was a meal that felt nurturing and special without being fussy. And whether you ate it in a rush before work or savored it with a second cup of tea, it always brought a little calm and comfort to the start of your day. Kippers and eggs. If you've ever walked into a kitchen where kippers were frying, you'll remember it. That smoky, salty scent filled the air, rich and briny like the sea itself. The fish, often split and lightly salted, would sizzle in the pan, its skin turning just crisp at the edges. Alongside, eggs were fried or scrambled, their mild creaminess a perfect match for the kipper's bold flavor. This was a fisherman's breakfast through and through, hearty, sustaining, and impossible to forget. In the 1960s, kippers were far more common on the breakfast table than they are today, sold smoked and ready to cook from the local fishmonger, or wrapped neatly in wax paper at the market. Some households even boiled them briefly before frying, softening the intense flavor. Served hot with perhaps a slice of buttered brown bread, they had a way of waking you up far better than any cup of coffee. It wasn't a breakfast you had every day. It was too special, too distinctive, but when it appeared, it felt like a treat, even if you didn't realize it at the time. The flavor lingered long after the plates were cleared, a reminder that breakfast could be bold and full of character. Bubble and squeak was the very definition of making the most of what you had. Leftover potatoes and cabbage, sometimes with a scattering of carrots or peas, were chopped and tossed into a hot frying pan with a little butter or dripping. As they cooked, the mixture flattened slightly, the edges turning crisp and golden, while the inside stayed soft and tender. The name came from the sound it made in the pan, a gentle bubbling and the faint squeak as the vegetables met the heat. A slice of bacon or a fried egg on top turned it into a full meal, but even on its own, it was pure comfort. In the 1960s, nothing was wasted, and this dish was proof that yesterday's dinner could become today's hearty breakfast. The smell was rustic and inviting, the taste humble but deeply satisfying. You didn't need fancy seasoning, just a bit of salt and pepper, maybe a dash of brown sauce on the side. Eating it was like sitting down to a warm hug on a plate, the kind that reminded you of home kitchens, shared tables, and the quiet genius of making something delicious from almost nothing.
Griddle scones. The gentle hiss of dough hitting a hot griddle was enough to make everyone in the kitchen perk up. Griddle scones were a treat you didn't have to wait long for. No oven preheating, no endless rising time.
Just a quick mix of flour, baking powder, milk, and a bit of butter, patted into rounds and set onto the griddle. The smell was warm and toasty, with a hint of butter as the scones browned. You'd flip them once, revealing that perfect golden underside, then wrap them in a clean tea towel to keep them soft until serving. Best eaten warm, they were sliced in half and slathered with butter that melted instantly, followed by a spoonful of jam, strawberry if you were lucky, but any would do. In the 1960s, these were often made on Sundays, a little indulgence before the big roast dinner later in the day. They felt homely, almost rustic, and yet special because they weren't an everyday breakfast. Sharing a plate of griddle scones was a way of slowing down, of enjoying the moment, and of making sure everyone started the day with something warm in their hands and a smile on their face. Pikelets with butter. Not quite a crumpet, not quite a pancake, pikelets were their own delightful thing. Round, golden, and just a little irregular around the edges, they cooked quickly on a flat griddle, filling the kitchen with a faintly sweet, doughy aroma. Their texture was what made them special, soft and slightly chewy, with just enough holes on the surface to trap the butter you'd inevitably spread over them. As soon as they came off the heat, they'd be stacked high on a plate, and the race to grab the warmest ones began. Some people liked them plain. Others added a smear of jam or a drizzle of syrup, but butter alone was often enough, melting into every nook and cranny. In the 60s, pikelets were a common treat in many British and Commonwealth homes, sometimes bought in paper packets from the bakery, but just as often made at home on a Saturday morning. They were affordable, filling, and endlessly versatile, equally at home at breakfast or tea time. And there was always that moment of satisfaction when you bit into one and felt the buttery warmth spread across your tongue. A small but perfect reminder that the simplest foods often left the biggest impression.
Full English fry-up. If there was ever a breakfast that made you feel ready to take on the world, it was the full English fry-up. The sizzle of bacon and sausages in the pan set the tone, soon joined by the comforting scent of fried eggs and mushrooms browning in butter. Baked beans simmered gently on the side, their sweet, savory aroma mingling with everything else. Then there was the fried bread, golden, crisp, and unapologetically indulgent, perfect for soaking up the egg yolk or the tomato juices from a grilled half tomato. In the 1960s, a fry-up wasn't an everyday event. It was a weekend or holiday feast, often served when family or guests were staying over. Each plate was a generous arrangement of colors and textures, creamy eggs, meaty sausages, glossy beans, and earthy mushrooms, all competing for space but working together in perfect harmony. It was filling, satisfying, and just a little bit decadent. Sitting down to a fry-up was more than eating breakfast. It was an occasion, a shared moment of abundance before the day truly began. And even as the plates emptied, the smell would linger, making you wish every morning could start this way. Smoked haddock Kedgeree. Kedgeree was a breakfast that carried with it a sense of history and quiet elegance. Originally inspired by Anglo-Indian cooking during the colonial era, it brought together flaked smoked haddock, fluffy rice, and a gentle curry seasoning. The haddock, poached until tender, filled the kitchen with a rich, smoky scent, which mingled beautifully with the warm spices. Hard-boiled eggs were sliced and scattered on top, their yolks adding a mellow creaminess to each forkful. Fresh parsley gave it a little pop of green, while a squeeze of lemon brightened the whole dish. In the 1960s, Kedgeree was considered something of a special breakfast, often served on Sunday mornings or at family gatherings, where it could be made in a big dish for everyone to share. It was filling without being heavy, and it felt just a touch exotic compared to the usual bacon and eggs. Eating it was an experience of layered flavors, the smokiness of the fish, the gentle warmth of the curry, and the subtle sweetness of the rice all working together. It was the kind of breakfast that made you feel both comforted and just a little bit adventurous.
Sunday morning pancakes. Before American-style breakfasts became widespread in the UK, pancakes were something of a rarity, often reserved for special occasions, or Sunday mornings when there was a little extra time. These weren't the thin, crepe-like pancakes of Shrove Tuesday, but thick, fluffy rounds that puffed up in the pan, their edges turning golden while the centers stayed soft and airy. The smell was irresistible. Warm batter, a hint of butter, and the faint sweetness that promised a treat. Fresh off the griddle, they'd be stacked high, each one spreading a little heat to the next. Toppings varied. Some drizzled golden syrup over the lot, watching it run slowly down the sides, while others spread jam thickly enough to turn the first bite into a burst of fruitiness. In the 60s, making pancakes felt like an event. Children would hover by the stove, hoping to snatch the first one off the plate, and there was always friendly debate over whether the last pancake should be saved for someone special or claimed by the cook. They were eaten slowly, savored between sips of tea, each bite a reminder that weekends were made for moments like this, simple, warm, and shared. The breakfasts your grandparents knew in the 1960s were more than recipes. They were moments stitched into the fabric of family life. From the smell of bacon on a cold winter morning to the sticky fingers from a Chelsea bun, each dish told a story about thrift, community, and simple pleasure. Even as instant cereals and fast food took over, these breakfasts held their ground in memory. They remind us that a good morning isn't about speed. It's about connection, flavor, and comfort. And maybe, just maybe, it's worth bringing some of them back.